Okay, so it is 7 o'clock, and I am calling the meeting of the San Leandro City Council to order. Today is a work session, and it is Monday, January 13th, 2025. I will lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. If you're able to stand, please do so.
I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic which stands one nation, under God, indivisible, liberty and justice for all.
Madam Clerk, would you please take the roll?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Councilmember Aguilar,
Present.
Councilmember Azevedo,
Present.
Councilmember Bolt,
Present.
Councilmember Simon is absent. Councilmember Viveros Walton,
Present.
Vice Mayor Bowen, Mayor Gonzalez.
Present.
Please note all are present except Vice Mayor Simon is absent. Thank you.
The City of San Leandro conducts its meetings in an orderly manner to fulfill its mandate. Discriminatory statements or conduct that would potentially violate the Federal Civil Rights Act of 1964 and or the California Fair Employment and Housing Act, California's Penal Code Section 403 or 415, are per se disruptive to a meeting and will not be tolerated. Please see the City Council Handbook and City Council Meeting Rules of Decorum for more information. Madam Clerk, your announcement.
Thank you, Mayor. If you would like to make a public comment during the meeting, you can do so in person or via Zoom. If you are present at the meeting, please complete a speaker card and submit it to the city clerk before the item is presented. If you wish to participate in public comment via Zoom, you can use the raise your hand tool when the item is called. During the public comment session, speakers will be invited to speak and will have a set time to share their comments. A countdown timer will appear for their convenience, and when the time is up, the microphone will be muted. All raised hands outside of public comment will be lowered to avoid confusion. Once public comment is opened, hands may be raised to speak. Thank you.
Okay, so today we've got two presentations. We're going to begin with our first presentation, our legislative platform, receiving an update from both the federal side and the state side. So there's no action to be taken today, but feel free, Council, to engage in a thorough discussion. So we've got Deputy City Manager Eric Engelbart here to kick off our presentation.
Good evening, Mayor and council members and members of the public. Pleased to be here with you all this evening. Joining us as well via Zoom, I'd like to reintroduce you all to Jen Covino from Covino Smith & Simon, as well as Nicolo DeLuca from Townsend Public Affairs. As many of you may recall, both Jen and Nicolo have been working with the city for many, many years, and one of their key roles is to advocate for San Leandro's interests in Washington, D.C. and in Sacramento. As the mayor alluded to in your packets this evening are two key documents for which we're seeking your feedback tonight. The first is the draft federal platform for 2025, and the second document is that draft state platform. As you recall, the purpose of these documents is really to serve as our work plan for the upcoming calendar year and for any efforts that involve coordination with the state or federal governments. Related efforts, as noted in the staff report, could include attending meetings, advocating for projects or funding when opportunities arise, and that could include during upcoming legislative conferences at which members of the council or staff could be in attendance. As always, the legislative process is inherently dynamic, so the council does maintain the authority to modify this document should any new issues arise or if changes are needed over the course of the year ahead. And as the mayor mentioned, since this evening's meeting is structured as a work session, our plan would be to bring these documents back to you all for formal adoption via consent calendar item at a future council meeting in the near future after incorporating any of your feedback that's provided at tonight's meeting. And with that, I'll now hand things over to Jen so she can provide her annual update. He'll be followed by Nicolo, and then we'll take any feedback or questions after they both concluded their presentations.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much to the city manager, to the mayor, the council, and to Eric for your introduction. I appreciate having the opportunity to brief you all tonight on the latest federal developments. And as you can imagine, as we start the calendar year 2025 in the 119th session of Congress, we are adapting to many transitions on the horizon, both with regard to the incoming Trump-Vance administration, as well as updates to your congressional delegation as we welcome new members of the California delegation to Capitol Hill. Moving on to the next slide, Right now, we're in the midst of the start of the 119th session of Congress, and we're awaiting the upcoming inauguration of President-elect Donald Trump and Vice President-elect J.D. Vance, who have been going about this transition that will culminate next Monday. There are a number of festivities planned for Washington, D.C. over the weekend, and so we are eagerly awaiting further personnel announcements from the administration as they prepare to assume the executive office once again. It is worth noting that they will start their tenure here with a Republican governing trifecta across both the executive and legislative branches, with control of both the House and Representatives and the Senate in the hands of Republicans. So there's somewhat of an opportunity for a dynamic legislative and regulatory environment moving forward now in calendar year 2025. This week, the Senate will begin vetting and hearing from cabinet level nominations. And so those hearings are set to start tomorrow. And we anticipate that most nominees will successfully move through that nomination process without much of a challenge. And once those folks are in their cabinet level positions, then we expect there to be much quicker movement in terms of filling out the rest of the positions throughout the executive branch. That will likely be coupled with somewhat of a downsizing of the executive branch if we understand the Trump administration's intentions from the onset. Now, obviously, every president seeks to accomplish many of their legislative priorities in the first 100 days of a term. And so President Trump's upcoming first 100 days of his second term will end April 30th, 2025. But if past is precedent with the president-elect's leadership, we actually expect there to be quite a few executive actions taken in the first week back in office. Moving on to the next slide. It's really important, though, for Beltway observers to understand that President-elect Trump, despite this Republican alignment in both the House and the Senate, will need to be well organized in terms of his legislative advocacy up on Capitol Hill, as the Republican Party has such narrow margins in both the House and the Senate this year. So over in the Senate, what's worth noting is the GOP did not secure the 60 seats necessary to overcome a filibuster. Therefore, Majority Leader John Thune, who is newly elected to replace the former Majority Leader Mitch McConnell of Kentucky, will be stepping into that role with some level of complication, because he will need to go about passing any legislation again with a simple majority. And the budget reconciliation process is the most likely tool to be utilized to accomplish that. And I'll get around to that in a second. Over in the House, Speaker Mike Johnson, who was just reelected on a first vote, will start the year with 219 Republicans in the House and one vacancy left by former Congressman Matt Gaetz of Florida. We do anticipate 2 additional departures over the weeks and months ahead, with President-elect Trump nominating 2 additional members of the House Republican majority to appointments within the administration. That will leave Speaker Johnson with a 217-215 majority. And if you can imagine, with members of various, levels of health and age, ensuring that the party has a simple majority on any given day is going to be a difficult process moving forward. Now, celebrating some transitions within California, my colleagues and I are looking forward to working with Senator Adam Schiff, as well as your new Congresswoman Latifah Simon and their staffs. They are in the process of staffing up. Congresswoman Simon has had a transition aide who's now helping her to fill out her staff, succeeding Congresswoman Barbara Lee, who did so much for the city over time. And so we're very grateful for her legacy that she leaves, and we'll want to ensure that Congresswoman Simon on a very local level is tasked with, carrying forward the city's projects and priorities, as well as introducing Senator Schiff, who is of Southern California, to the area, to the East Bay, and ensuring that his staff understands your unique local priorities as we go forward. So we're looking forward to ensuring that the council and city staff have good working relations with those new members, and we're excited to get to work. Moving on to the next slide, just setting the agenda for the year ahead. Now, the House formally adopted its rule package following their election of the Speaker last week. And that's used in some cases to sort of identify, the top level priorities for the year ahead. So within the rules package, there were 12 priority bills that were identified on a range of different issues, and many have some controversy surrounding them. But those bills largely contended with issues including immigration enforcement and restrictions for sanctuary jurisdictions. There's a bill in there focused on gender identity in Title IX, as well as a requirement for U.S. citizenship for voter registration across every state. So those are just indicative of what the House Republican majority will want to pursue over the next 2 years in the session of Congress. Now, complicating any attempts at legislating are the fact that we've got the Treasury currently operating, utilizing extraordinary measures to be in compliance with fulfilling or avoiding the debt ceiling. And that is coupled with the fact that the Fiscal Responsibility Act that was enacted last year does have some strings attached to setting the budget and avoiding, driving up the deficit. So there's going to be a very serious conversation going on deficit reduction and reining in federal spending that I want to encourage all local government officials to be considerate of as we go forward. And all of us having an opportunity to really to be proactive in our defense of your critical formula allocations that you receive on an annual basis, and demonstrating the utility of those investments, the impact on the local level, the impact you've made, and the fact that you're leveraging non-federal dollars to implement effective programs and projects. I think that message will be well received and quite critical as time goes on here. Now, for the time being, the federal government, which is now more than a quarter into fiscal year 2025, that's federal fiscal year, we're currently operating on a continuing resolution that's set to expire in mid-March. Now, Congress's sort of first order of business is going to be to come to a resolution on a full year budget deal that in which they will need to reconcile 12 different spending bills from the House and the Senate before their work can begin in earnest on next year, fiscal year 2026, and that package of spending bills that they'll need to do before October 1st, or once again, go down the path of these short-term stopgaps. Now, there were also a number of expiring authorizations in the final weeks of the last session of Congress during the lame duck. There were attempts made by congressional leaders to address those expiring authorizations, everything from the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, which, is responsible for setting workforce development policy, to the Older Americans Act, which governs, the operations of nutritional assistance and recreational opportunities for senior citizens in your communities. And then there's a host of other bills that are, or laws that are set to expire later this year, where either, again, Congress will have the option of merely extending those authorizations or really proposing sincere reforms to any of those authorizations. And I think this year, more so than previous years, there may be a heavy emphasis on proposing some reforms, particularly as they relate to spending. Of course, this session of Congress, we're also expecting lawmakers to utilize the tool they have in the Congressional Review Act to seek to repeal or rescind any Biden-Harris administration era regulations that were promulgated in the final months of this administration. Moving on to the next slide, just want to give you a quick overview of budget reconciliation. Now, that's going to be how the Republican majority is seeking to really pass any of their top priorities with a simple majority that's required, getting to 50 plus the Vice President-elect J.D. Vance potentially to serve as a tiebreaker. Now, the Byrd Rule, which is parliamentary procedure that none of you need to be familiar with, beyond the fact that it will require that any legislative provisions included in any forthcoming measure produce changes that are not just merely incidental to policy changes, meaning that they need to have very specific impacts for spending or revenue receipts beyond just trying to change a federal policy. Any policies that are not just merely incidental to the budget can be scrubbed by the Senate parliamentarian in what is called the Byrd path. And so what does that mean for us? Well, we understand Congress is preparing to consider a package that could amount to up to $5 trillion worth of spending. That's outlined in the next slide here. They're targeting April or May for consideration of this broad package that would include measures to ensure our national security. So everything from resources to support immigration enforcement or to bolster our border security, to efforts to ensure our energy security, as well as some economic policy. So you may be aware of the fact that the Tax Cut and Jobs Act, which is heralded as one of President-elect's greatest legislative accomplishments from his first term, that many of those provisions are set to expire at the end of the calendar year. So we're also looking at Congress needing to take on tax reform this year. And with that, again, we think that budget reconciliation will be the process for them to doing that. Just in terms of economic policy for you to be considerate of, you know, the president-elect has made some campaign promises to exclude tipped income, as well as what we're seeing is a potential adjustment of the state and local tax deduction, the cap that's currently $10,000. There are a number of House Republicans in high tax states like California, New York, New Jersey, who've formed a coalition, and they, because of the narrow majority in the House, will likely refuse to support anything that does not increase the current 10,000 cap. And so we're hearing figures right now of anywhere from $20,000 for married couples up to $60,000 for that cap. Now, this package also presents an opportunity for Congress to modernize or expand housing tax credits. And given the fact that Congress did not enact substantial legislation to address the affordable housing and homelessness crisis that we're seeing across the country, we think that lawmakers will likely take this opportunity to expand the low-income housing tax credit as one potential example, and maybe to consider some other provisions to help aid with affordable housing nationwide. So we're hopeful on that front. There is some risk associated with some of the clean energy tax credits that were authorized by the Inflation Reduction Act that are available to units of local government through what is known as direct pay provisions. But once again, there are a number of sort of swing district Republicans from states like California that are urging Speaker Johnson to maintain those clean energy tax credits because of their appeal to not only the public sector, but the private sector as well. Now, they'll seek to increase revenues to support these measures through potential increased tariffs across the board. And so again, this is going to be complicated going forward, but it represents the best opportunity for Congress to pass substantial legislation addressing a number of the administration's priorities in the early months here. Moving on to executive actions that we anticipate next week. I know that the president-elect is eager to repeal many Biden-era regulations outlined in the next slide. And so we expect these efforts to address immigration, to repeal a number of Biden-Harris administration regulations related to climate and environmental justice, as well as a repeal of DEI initiatives at the federal level. And if we could move on to the next slide here. We also expect that the incoming Trump-Vance administration is likely to pursue a deregulatory agenda across the whole of federal government. And as you know, your neighbors to the south there in Southern California are struggling with the wildfires, I do think there may be some benefit to some hard conversations up front about, you know, any administrative barriers to successful relief and rebuilding efforts there. So we expect sort of a full focus on this as soon as they're in office. Now, externally, there is a cast of characters who are participating in an initiative you may have heard of known as DOGE. We expect those external advisors to offer recommendations to rescind burdensome regulations, to find efficiencies by reforming administrative processes and reducing federal personnel, to ultimately realize cost savings to taxpayers. So that is a process that should take about 2 years. I would encourage units of local government through the U.S. Conference of Mayors, the National League of Cities, and so on to be active in those discussions. Again, going on defense about the appropriations you receive in an annual basis that are the most meaningful to your communities.
Hey,
Moving on.
Jen,
Yep.
just really quickly, I'd like you to take the last minute to go ahead and wrap up. We had originally given you 10 and we increased it to 15.
Thanks, Mayor. Really quickly, I think a lot of folks out there are expecting a lot of reforms in the immigration policy front. So I do just want to urge community leaders to be aware of the likely rescinding of Biden-era enforcement priorities in expanding powers of the Customs and Border Patrol and Immigrations and Custom Enforcement to detain and deport undocumented individuals. The incoming administration may terminate legal status by ending some temporary protected status designations. And we expect that to be coupled with restrictions on lawful immigration and a cap on refugee admissions that may be as low as 20 or 15,000 a year. With that, local officials should be aware of the fact that the administration may seek to deputize local law enforcement utilizing 287G agreements to increase the number of expedited removals. We expect Congress to also pursue legislation to restrict public assistance to individuals or mixed status families, as well as additional restrictions, expanding the definition of what constitutes a sanctuary city and to restrict those jurisdictions' eligibility for federal funds. Finally, in closing, I want you to understand that as we move forward looking at infrastructure programs, there will be some continuity as the Trump-Vance administration will be tasked with the administration of the final rounds of programs and funds authorized by the bipartisan infrastructure law that are there and accessible to support your local projects, such as Shoreline project, for instance. I want to encourage the city to consider looking at potential investments in your city's opportunity zone. That's an initiative that was founded in the Tax Cut and Jobs Act. We expect that the Trump administration will want to seek to reprioritize federal funds to those opportunity zones, and the city has one, so just want to give that some thought. So in closing, I just want to thank you all for your time today. I look forward to responding to any questions you may have. Appreciate your attention to all of these developments at the federal level, and my team and I look forward to working with you throughout the year ahead to secure some good outcomes for your constituents back in San Leandro. Thank you so much.
Thank you for the thoroughness of your presentation. We're going to take public comment on this item first. That way we can make sure that those questions, et cetera, get looped into our discussion. And then we'll raise our own questions and have our own discussion here. Do we have anyone from the public? Yes, go ahead.
Mayor, with your permission, would it be okay if we had Nicolo?
Do them. Hold on just a second. Okay, so it's good news. We have Jen will stick around. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
With that, then what we're going to do is we're going to put you on hold for a second. We're going to listen to Nicolo's presentation, and then we'll take them both together in terms of Q&A.
Honorable Mayor and council members, Madam City Manager, my name is Nicolo DeLuca, and I have a presentation this evening, if I could share the screen. Well, there we go. Making sure everyone is able to see that. First, I want to thank all of you for the opportunity to Zoom in. I was planning to come down in person. Unfortunately, one of my two sons thought they would give me the flu, so I am staying in Sacramento and appreciate the sensitivity. I also want to thank you all for the great partnership in last year, 2024, and then excited about moving into 2025. I will be as succinct as possible with this presentation, and then happy to answer any questions you all may have. So first, we're going to talk about a summary of efforts in 2024. We're going to talk about anticipated issues for 2025, and then we're going to talk about our overall advocacy program on behalf of the City of San Leandro. And when I say we, I'm presenting tonight, but towards the end, you'll see a slide of some of my great teammates that are part of Team San Leandro. So quick kind of some background for the newer council members, an overview of who we are. We've been fortunate to work with the city over a decade of great partnership with the City of San Leandro. Very, very proud to say we've partnered together to help secure over 21 million in state funding. And also very proud to say we were able to get 3 city-sponsored bills signed into law. So now, what did we do in 2024? As you all recall, around this time last year in Sacramento, there was a massive deficit. Due to having a massive deficit, the governor and his administration proposed a lot of clawbacks, as in taking funding that had already been awarded and was partially dispersed. Very grateful for the effort of the mayor, Mr. Engelbart, the city team, Senator at the time Skinner, and Assemblymember Ortega for helping us all partner together to stop the clawback of over $4 million for the Mulford Marina Branch Library project. That was a very intensive effort that spanned many, many months, and very grateful for the strong partnership with the team, our delegation up here, and we're able to turn that around from proposal of taking all the money to making sure that that money stayed in whole. In addition, our grants team worked closely with the city to partner to secure over $240,000 through the ICARP Extreme Heat and Community Resilience Program. So that was another great win that we were proud of. What else did we work on? There was also, as part of the clawback, there was a lot of proposals to really strip local government programs. There was a lot of proposals to rescind the HAP program, which provides cities and counties funding to address the unhoused. There was a lot of proposals to take back some of the ATP, Active Transportation Program funding, and we were able to work with many others, coalitions, individuals, and our delegation to help stop that. We were also very fortunate in a team effort to get the inclusion in the climate bond. $10 billion climate bond has a lot of funding categories that are near and dear to the city of San Leandro's heart. Last year, due to the budget deficit, there was no member requests, aka district spending, or also known as earmarks. However, we're hearing with the budget looking a little bit better, there could be an opportunity this year, and that effort's already underway, working closely with the administration. A couple other things that have kept us very busy in partnership with this city, SB 1383 implementation, that was about separate organics. We worked closely with your library director, who's been great to work with, and Mr. Engelbart to protect the library resources and making sure that some of the provisions that we originally thought were part of the requirements were actually not. We also worked with the coalition of libraries. Oops, sorry. In addition, the city was a supporter of the organized retail theft legislation. As you all know, that was signed into law. A lot of the assembly members were happy to get San Leandro's support to help tell our story and why we needed some of these new tools. And then towards the end of the session, there were some, frankly, pretty bad bills that were taking local control from cities. We were able to stop those. One was some of the restrictions around removing vehicles that had been abandoned or displaced. So what are we looking like in 2025? Number one, we've got 25% new members in both the Senate and the Assembly. We have a new senator, and through some great work of the mayor, we've already begun that strong relationship with Senator Grayson. We've got a lot of other members to educate and brief as to what the city cares about and what some of our priorities are. Implementation of the propositions, the climate bond, Prop 36, a lot of other propositions need to be implemented. So that will be a focus of legislation. Just this Thursday, Senator Wiener introduced an intent bill. So it's a spot bill, it's a shell bill on the Bay Area Transportation Revenue Measure. That's something that we're going to be working on closely, and definitely want to make sure that the city's perspective and input is into whatever legislation ends up moving forward. The cap and trade program doesn't need to be reauthorized for a few more years. However, we're part of a big push to make that happen sooner rather than later, because there's some strong funding for transportation projects, affordable housing projects, and land conservation. It's absolutely tragic what's happening in Los Angeles. So that's going to impact some of the property insurance availability and affordability. Already seen some spot bills coming out there. And then, of course, the upcoming grant funding programs that our grant team works closely with the city on. So now what do we do for our advocacy program? You will see the various bullet points about weekly updates, grant check-ins, identification of key legislation and budget priorities, and then consistent reports and updates. You can see all of this. It's a very busy, robust program with the city. making sure that whatever we're working on is clear and we are initiating all of your requests and moving things forward. And then I mentioned the team that I'm very proud of, as you will see. That is a picture of all of them. So I am done presenting. I am happy to answer any questions you all may have. And again, thank you very much. It's an honor to work with all of you, and looking forward to another great productive year in 25.
Okay, thank you for your questions. At this point in time, we're going to go ahead and take public questions, and then we'll come back to our questions and dialogue. And to be very clear, this is the opportunity for the public to comment on what has been presented. Let us begin in person. Do we have any cards?
Mr. Mayor, we have no public comment in person, and we have one hand up online.
Let's move online, please.
Doug Spalding, you may unmute yourself. Doug Spalding, you may unmute yourself.
Give him one last try, please.
There's the button. Good evening, council members and legislative analyst guests. This is a question perhaps for both the analysts from the state and the federal level. I know many are aware that in the last week, the municipality of Huntington Beach has sued the state of California over the state's sanctuary state laws. I'm very proud that the city of San Leandro itself declared itself a sanctuary city by unanimous vote back in 2017 with the support of San Leandro Police Department. I'm just wondering what you see happening in your crystal balls. This seems like a wrench in the works, and I'm wondering what, as a city, we can do to bolster our own sanctuary city status and help ourselves under the whatever onslaught is coming from the Trump administration's homeland security folks. I know in my school district, we're passing out their red cards to give to family members that don't necessarily have legal status to hand over to agents that may come to the door. I'm wondering what, as a city, we might do similarly, both in conjunction with the state legislature and what we can do as a city to educate our residents and educate each other about what rights there are and how to protect each other. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Mayor, there's no more public comment.
Okay, so I'll close public comment and come to the council for questions, discussions. It's the whole thing, and we'll go around as many times as we need. So starting with Councilmember Viveros Walton.
Thank you. Actually, my main question was that our sanctuary city and protecting your sanctuary city status is not on our federal and state platform. So that's something that I wanted to elevate to include. And then it's unclear to me in terms of the intersection of the special session that happened earlier this year and the allocation of additional funds to our attorney general to kind of defend these kind of statewide sanctuary city policies. And I'm interested in kind of that nexus between, do we know, and I'm unsure where this question should be directed to, but I'm just wondering if there has been some discussions on the intersection between the state defending the kind of statewide sanctuary cities, and then how does that sanctuary state policy, and then how that relates to cities, and like how do we ensure that that gets included into our both federal and state platform to ensure that we continue to retain our sanctuary cities and defend that status that we have.
Okay, so I hear, I think, question and a request. So let me just try to disentangle and you tell me if I've got it right. So the question being, is there when we go to Sacramento or to the federal government to advocate, is there currently activity or is there a role whereby there might be legislative action taken in the state, for instance, funding, or legislative action that might be taken in other ways that help maintain or promote the I'll call it the California way as it exists right now. So I'm going to start with that to them, and then separately we can talk about how we want to, if we need to, tweak our platform. So I'll start with you, Nicolo, because obviously California has some designations. The Attorney General has talked about funding allocations. The governor has made certain comments, commitments. So why don't you run with that and see where this goes?
Absolutely. So, Mayor, thank you, and to the council members. So, yes, the state, during part of their special session, they've approved up to $50 million to the Department of Justice to take the lead, as an Attorney General, to take the lead on fighting many of the efforts that we expect the federal government to take. First and foremost, the sanctuary state/cities. And our Attorney General has been very clear that's something he's going to stand up against. If history is a teacher, when President Trump, during his first term, that was something that he made an effort as to rescind sanctuary city and state status. If I call correctly, it might have been Senator Ben Hueso from San Diego was the author on legislation pushing back against, it was Senator Hueso and Senator De Leon pushing back against this proposal and essentially rewording it and working it so the state and cities in the state can continue to do what they see fit as it comes to protecting those that are undocumented. I very much expect the same thing to happen, whereas the president's playbook that I've heard that it will be repeated based off of his first term. I expect our legislature with the Democratic strong majority to do the same things of standing up against him, whether it's about undocumented workers, whether it's about state sanctuary status, or any other issues. So in a nutshell, yes, the state legislature has approved $50 million to go to fight various lawsuits against the federal government. Yes, we're expecting some type of legislation to be introduced, which is an opportunity for the city to take a public position. And Honorable Mayor, to your point about what can be done when we're up here, when y'all are up here in Sacramento, I think a lot of it's also just telling our story. Remember, we have 25% new members in the Assembly and in the Senate. And unfortunately, at times, there's a huge volume of information coming, whether through legislation or other updates. So we have a great opportunity to tell our story about what San Leandro does to protect those that are undocumented, but also at the same time ensuring residents are safe and there's equal access, and there's also public safety is accounted for when needed. So a lot of opportunities, expecting the state to continue their fight against the federal government, and funding has been allocated to do so.
You want to continue with that?
I guess we can talk about inclusion later in the platform. My other question in terms of both the federal and the state platform, and another thing that I wanted to include was, and I'm unclear about where this could fit, but in terms of Lake Chabot Road and advocacy around, we have $11 million number that we're solving for there. And would like to have that included in both the state and the federal. And I was reading through it. It kind of fits in some, but I'm just wanting to ensure that we have a conversation about if it already fits in one of those policies, that it's explicit, such as a specific project.
I was conferring with city manager and I missed the very first part of that.
Oh.
$11 million being.
That's the number we're solving for in terms of the Lake Chabot Road. Yeah. So just including that
in our discussion.
If the city manager thinks that it already fits in one of both the federal and the state buckets, then if we can just include Lake Chabot Road in one of them, and we can have that discussion about how that fits, right, amongst all the other priorities. But that's one thing that I wanted to put on the table. And I see that my time is up, so I'll cede the mic to someone else who.
And we'll come around several times. Councilmember Acevedo, please.
Thank you, Jen and Nicola, for your presentations. Okay, I have a few questions. Okay, the first one I'll start with Jen. Regarding, is there any new grants regarding like ferries or dredging or anything to do that we can use for the marina?
Hey, good afternoon. Thanks so much for the question. So the good news for the time being with any transition is on infrastructure specifically, we expect some level of continuity for the next 2 years as the bipartisan infrastructure law has been authorized through the end of federal fiscal year 2026, meaning that bipartisan legislatures have authorized those programs. Many actually enjoy what's known as advance appropriations from Congress. And so for the most part, the current grant landscape should largely be untouched. What I will offer, though, is we do expect the Trump-Vance administration to apply their own discretionary evaluation criteria overlaid with the congressional statutes for some of the programs. So with ferries, for instance, I would offer, whereas the Biden-Harris administration may have been very concerned with equity and climate, what I would encourage us to just consider as we go forward here is, trying to make the appeal to the incoming administration's focus on what may turn out to be economic development benefits or tourism or leverage of non-federal dollars as we go forward. So, just in terms of some of the appointees, former Congressman Sean Duffy has been tasked as the next Secretary of Transportation. We expect him to be confirmed. The folks who have been appointed beneath him are folks who actually come from industry. So when it comes to ferries, I expect the few current Hallmark programs that are accessible through the Federal Transit Administration to remain available. And then as we're thinking through dredging, there's always the opportunity through the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers to explore the Continuing Authorities program that has been accessible to units of local government for some time. There's legislative potential every 2 years to focus on the Water Resources Development Act that requires a biennial reauthorization. And so there are pathways there. What I will offer, though, to any unit of local government is there's been overwhelming demand for federal funding for dredging specifically. And the Biden-Harris administration has elected to focus utilization of those funds toward deep water ports in support of the national supply chain that saw major disruptions over the past few years. And because of that, projects that may be considered more local or regional in nature have not competed as successfully as, let's say, the Port of Baltimore or some of your Northwest Seaport Alliance or the Port of Oakland in terms of competing for those funds. So just wanted to call your attention to that consideration, but the funding is out there and I'm eagerly awaiting, word from the incoming administration about how they may repurpose funds. I know that supply chain will continue to be an issue, but I think that they are folks that are concerned with more equitable outcomes for small to mid-sized communities and rural communities in a way that we don't necessarily see with the Biden administration as much. So hopefully that's helpful, and I'll look forward to following up with you and your team regarding those conversations over the next few weeks.
Okay, this is a question for both of you. Have you seen any legislation regarding mobile homes, any policies or restrictions on a federal or a state level?
I'm happy to take the lead on that, Jen, if that's cool with you. I saw you went on mute. So council members, the ledge session just started last Monday, and we have until February 21st for bills to be introduced. However, Sacramento, we're full of rumors up here. I did hear late last week that a state senator from around the Southern California area was considering something on RVs, not necessarily to be like overly strict on RVs, but something along the lines of certainly allowing for safe parking, allowing for the unhoused to be part of city programs, but some of the blight that's been associated with RVs have been abandoned. That's all I've heard. Do you mind saying a little bit more?
So regarding that, we did pass a safe parking RV in San Leandro. So would we might be able to get money or some? Well, It hasn't been introduced yet, but hopefully we'll be able to get some money or something towards that.
There has been funding through the HAP program and the ERF program, Encampment Resolution Fund, that does fund interim and temporary housing such as safe parking. However, a successful application then would need to lead to some type of permanent supportive housing. You all have a great track record with the Nimitz Motel, and your city team did a hell of a great job getting that Home Key Award. So you all have a good reputation in Sacramento, at least through the governor's administration and his housing department, on how you're trying to address permanent supportive housing. But council member, if you have any additional questions or comments specifically on
I got a couple.
mobile homes, happy to answer some of those.
Thanks. On slide 4, the 244,000 secured through the ICARP, Extreme Heat and Community Resilience Program. Is that going towards the cooling centers, and what is that money going towards, so the community knows?
You know what, that's a great question. Let me get with Alex Gibbs, our grants manager, to have the exact details as to what that money's going for.
Do we have any other, did you have any other questions?
I have one more question.
Yeah, go ahead and
Make it
wrap.
quick. Okay. On slide 6, the organized retail theft prevention package signed into law. You mentioned new tools. What are the new tools we have for it?
So keep in mind that the retail theft package was approved, but the District Attorneys Association still went for and moved forward with Prop 36. And nothing in Prop 36 overturned the retail theft package and vice versa. Some of the new tools you have are serial offenders. So if there have been those that have been part of retail theft before and they had felonies, the penalties against them would be a lot stronger. Some of the retail theft, greater authority that you have is allowing law enforcement to build bigger cases throughout the region. If there's any type of documentation of a thought out plan to bring in young people, there'd be greater provisions to go after them there. A lot of these were giving greater authority to your sheriff's department, your DA's department, and your law enforcement to go after those serial offenders. What has been discussed in the past is, well, what about the funding? I do recall about 18 months ago, there was a very effective program, the retail theft program out of the governor's office. That was a one-time program. There have been a lot of requests for more money to be sent to small business owners, whether for facade improvements, bollards, other types of barriers, and or security cameras. As the budget process unfolds, that is something that we want to help push and get the city engaged in if there's an opportunity to do so.
So I'll go on to
What I-
Councilmember, I'll come back to you.
Okay.
So Councilmember Bolt, please.
Yes, thank you both for the presentations. My first question, or the one question I have right now, is for Jen. You mentioned the cutting of the workforce development funds coming from the federal funds. First, I want to say thank you for suggesting us to rethink the way we propose getting some of these funds, where before we would go one route, and then now in this route we would, maybe frame it as new development and things like that to try and get funds that way. What we saw last time with this administration, or half of this administration, was the onslaught for apprenticeships across the nation. I mean, they were coming after them extremely hard. That's a tool to cut into the working class and the ability to keep wages down. So you have already read something or saw something where they're going to be cutting workforce development funds, and if so, what are some of the things we can do as a city to kind of shore up what we have going on?
So on that, fortunately, good news, and thank you for prompting the clarification, because it obviously was not clear. So on the workforce front, fortunately, what I was alluding to was the need to reauthorize the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act. And so there aren't any proposed cuts coming yet. In fact, it was sort of the opposite. In the final weeks of the lame duck session, the House and the Senate had actually proposed the reauthorization of that legislation as a provision to be including in what was known as the omnibus agreement, sort of the next form of the continuing resolution that was under consideration. This was right before December 20th, when there was somewhat of a threat of a federal government shutdown. If you were paying attention to the news, Speaker Johnson had originally presented a 1,500-page stopgap to his caucus that then revolted against it for accusations of there being sort of unrelated spending in there. Well, some of those provisions that Congress was attempting to include at the time included those expiring reauthorizations that were must pass by the end of the year that are extended now through the current stopgap through March 14th. Those authorities exist, but there is an absence of any proposed reforms to the programs that were currently in place. So if Speaker Johnson had succeeded in moving that legislation over the finish line, we actually would have had substantial new policy governing our workforce investment board system and a host of programs administered by the U.S. Department of Labor. Now, what I would have to offer from a local government perspective, that legislation in its compromise form at the end of the last session of Congress would have had some reforms included that entities like the National League of Cities, the U.S. Conference of Mayors, National Association of Counties, all nonpartisan intergovernmental organizations, had expressed some concerns about regarding a loss of potential local control and funding that would have been instead captured with additional allocations going to your state government for the governor to utilize on a discretionary basis to address urgent economic sector needs rather than distributing those funds down to your local workforce investment boards. It would have proposed a redesignation of some local workforce investment zones that was controversial. And so because of some of those reforms, with the lack of some of the proposed policy changes that folks were hoping to see about increasing the use of funds to go towards supportive services like transportation and wraparound services for workers who were upskilling. Because of that, it didn't get over the finish line. Some may argue that that's for the better that it didn't, but what we're expecting is a robust discussion, we hope sometime this year, to get to that reauthorization. Again, it may take a different form now that they were unsuccessful in the last session of Congress, but the attention is there on, necessary reforms to keep pace with, global economic competitiveness and the needs of the American working and middle classes.
Okay, thank you very much.
I'm going to Councilmember Aguilar next.
Thank you, Mayor Gonzalez. I just wanted to touch up on, this is for Nicolo and Jen, with regards to PFAS, to polyfluoroalkyl substances. What are we doing to advocate with regards to, at the state level, to help eliminate PFAS in local water and at the federal level?
Council member, there's been a lot of action on that last year. There was a big push, a couple of bills, and I know Water Resources Board, that was one of the items that they tackled. We've worked with a handful of cities kind of in the deeper East Bay to work on some of these changes and support those proposals. So I'm definitely happy to add the city as part of that. If I recall off the top of my head, I want to say there's around 10 to 15 bills that started off on PFAS. We could also add that to our legislative tracking once all the bills come out. So it's good to know that's something that the city cares about. Our team, in fact, one of our deputy directors, Eric O'Donnell, he's our water expert. He's become an expert on that. And so happy to connect him with the city team. But we were very active last year in a lot of the efforts, and I'm definitely happy to bring the city in on future efforts in 25.
Wonderful, thank you.
And just to piggyback off that, so there's really been so much movement at the federal level on this specific topic. So earlier this year, back in April of 2024, the Environmental Protection Agency went ahead and actually announced the first national primary drinking water regulation to govern 6 PFAS. And basically EPA for the first time established legally enforceable levels that are to be known as maximum contaminant levels for those 6 different PFAS contaminants in drinking water. Now, the bipartisan infrastructure law did include an influx of federal funding specifically to address PFAS and other emerging contaminants. Some of that funding is being targeted through the traditional sort of water infrastructure programs that EPA oversees. That would be, your clean water and drinking water state revolving funds, where there's a need for local jurisdictions to go to their state agencies to have discussions about applying for those funding. But the EPA at the federal level has targeted those dollars again with specific set-asides for addressing emerging contaminants. There's also a separate grant program that was established for emerging contaminants in small or disadvantaged communities. I believe you all or your population was too big for that. I will double check on that. But again, I just want to recommend that, we've depending on the program, we've either got 2 or 1 more cycle left on the infrastructure law. So please do engage your partners back there at the state level. And if you want to have any conversations back here in DC with EPA headquarters, just so that they can educate you and sort of help you navigate those discussions back with your state partners, I would have to offer that there is overwhelming demand for these funds. So I would almost encourage any local government to think of sort of getting their place in line, to wait online for a year or 2 to tap into those funds. But those programs are largely based on need. So unfortunately, if there is great need there, that will help with your evaluation criteria.
Thank you, Jen. I think that my next question is with regards to carbon dioxide. In the atmosphere, the ocean is absorbing a large portion of CO2, and which is making the seawater more acidic. So with regards to advocacy with eliminating that process, is that something that we can tie in with regards to eliminating the carbon dioxide that is dumped into the bay?
Sure. I would just offer, the bipartisan infrastructure law, again, provided somewhat of a landscape of federal resources that I would encourage you to think of as maybe a quilt or a patchwork to address some of these issues. Now, depending on your local sources there of carbon dioxide, I would point you to a range of different opportunities. As an example, the Department of Energy is overseeing, a commercial carbon storage project. The U.S. Department of Transportation and the Federal Highway Administration is overseeing a carbon reduction program specifically intended to reduce transportation emissions from local roadways. And so no shortage of opportunities. What I would have to offer is any programming that's within the sort of climate space. I do expect there to be some potential rebranding around some of this. I'll just say, in my tenure serving, just working on behalf of cities from administration to administration, sometimes people like to rebrand or repurpose programs with new titles to avoid certain political associations. So we could see an element of that. I have been heartened just to see the appointment of someone like Lee Zeldin, a former New York congressman, to oversee the EPA, because he's someone that has contended with environmental issues back in his House district, and someone who brings awareness in a pledge to, continue to ensure access to clean air and clean water. And I hope that we'll all work together in advancing those shared goals that they've outlined.
And that's if this current administration does not get rid of the EPA.
True.
Thank you. Those are my questions.
Okay, Vice Mayor Bowen, please.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Jen and Nicolo, for your presentations. A lot of really great thoughts from my council colleagues that I just want to add on to. In terms of our focus with sanctuary cities, one of the things that I really wanted to uplift and find a way to incorporate specifically into our platform is calling out the real fear that is founded on certainly past actions and a lot of what is already, I think, being proposed by the incoming administration for the Asian community. Between 2019 and 2020, at the start of the pandemic, in San Leandro alone, anti-Asian hate rose by 300%. And there is, in terms of immigration policy, it's really disheartening to think about what the administration wants to do for in reduction in refugees. We do have a vibrant refugee community in San Leandro. I am a product of refugee policies to the United States, and I think right now, certainly with the Chinese community, and I hate to say it, but the reality is for most people to look at somebody from Asia, and even as an American that is Asian, there is not a lot of difference for people when they look at us. So all of us are the same, and all of us are othered, oftentimes, more times than not. And I just want to be able to specifically put some effort into understanding things that are happening at the national level so that we can respond to it, as well as figuring any sort of proactive measures to address some of the concerns that the community has. So I don't know if there, to call that out, and then if you have anything that you're hearing or something that we should be aware of, I really appreciate that.
Thanks so much. And I'm happy to jump in and share some considerations from the federal level. And I just want to offer that I want to ensure that for each of our local government clients that they are understanding some important differences in the landscape between now and the first Trump administration. So first of all, I want to offer that, it's our current understanding that we should assume that in the early days of the Trump-Vance administration, that they will likely reinstitute some of the grant requirements for U.S. Department of Justice funding that were required as they were in the first administration around self-certification and compliance with Section 1373 in terms of law enforcement coordination with federal immigration officials. So that would not represent much of a change from past prologue. But what I want to have to offer you is that both the legislative and the judicial landscape are dramatically different entering into 2025. And so I want to just call your attention to a series of bills that have already been introduced in the House of Representatives since the session began on January 3rd. And for your awareness, I would quickly review that. HR 32 has been introduced, and that is a bill that would provide sanctuary jurisdictions that provide benefits to undocumented persons who are present in the United States without lawful status under immigration laws would become ineligible for federal funding intended to benefit those people. HR 50 is a bill that would prohibit grants provided under Section 106 of the Housing and Community Development Act of 1974 from being used to assist persons who are not here lawfully. And HR 205 is a bill that would prohibit the use of federal funds for congressional earmarks, otherwise known as congressionally directed spending or community project funding, targeted to states or units of local governments that are considered as sanctuary jurisdictions. So as you can understand, there is a legislative effort being pursued by federal lawmakers on Capitol Hill to expand penalties for those jurisdictions considered to be sanctuary jurisdictions in forms of administration of federal grant assistance to the locality or state itself, in sort of an expansion of potential penalties for restricted uses. I will offer that there are letters that have been sent to state and local officials throughout the country by Stephen Miller's private legal entity, America First Legal, that cautions to state and local officials that under the supremacy clause of the U.S. Constitution, that federal immigration laws would supersede state or local laws that purport to either modify or nullify any federal requirements. And then America First Legal, in those December communications that went out to state and local officials, including Governor Newsom, outlines the consequences for failure to abide by current federal immigration law, and outlines criminal liabilities for sanctuary jurisdictions, in that they usually require multiple officials to coordinate activities, and all officials would therefore, in their eyes, be held liable under multiple federal criminal conspiracy statutes. and that could carry a penalty of up to 20 years imprisonment and could lead to personal financial liabilities for victims of crimes committed by persons who are undocumented, who are protected by sanctuary jurisdictions. There may be an ability to sue officials involved in either harboring those undocumented persons under Federal Racketeer Influence and Corrupt Organizations Act statutes, and those public officials or public employees who enforce or follow those policies could face liabilities under substantive due process, state creator danger doctrine. And so, again, I just want to make you aware of a very clear playbook that the incoming administration, under the leadership of Stephen Miller, is likely to pursue here on the issue of sanctuary jurisdictions, to understand that. At the same time, recognizing your concerns for members of your community, I do want to assert that during the previous Trump administration, we saw many mayors, council members, and their partners throughout intergovernmental organizations stand up for their principles and, celebrate the diversity of new Americans, refugees and immigrants who lived in their communities. And so, it's important to strike that balance. I understand that. And I'm just happy to have any additional conversations on this issue, as we, come to understand the policies and initiatives that the incoming Trump administration will pursue, and it likely in its very early days, coupled with the legislative initiatives happening on Capitol Hill, that I want you to be aware of those developments sort of in real time as we go forward. So appreciate your perspective and look forward to working with you in response to these developments as time goes on.
And I can just quickly bring up the rear, and Councilmember will be brief. About 2 weeks ago, I had a conversation with Assemblymember Alex Lee, whereas he's not the representative for San Leandro, but he's kind of down near the San Jose area. He was very, very concerned of the impact to the Asian community, specifically the fear and just the misinformation. He is one of the co-chairs of the Progressive Caucus. That's a group, an informal group of assembly members and senators that are more progressive. And he said that is something that they definitely want to take up, is how do you kind of get the message out against the fear? How do you kind of let immigrant communities understand what the federal government's really capable of and what the state's also doing? So that was a discussion that we recently had. One other final point, when I talked about the $50 million that has been allocated by the legislature to fight the Trump initiatives, of that, 25 million could go to nonprofit legal defense funds for the immigrant community to help make sure that there is protection and there is a legal defense fund. So I think Jen summed it up well. And I know up here in Sacramento that the legislature is very, very afraid of kind of the fear mongering and the clear intimidation towards various communities. And their intent is to really put their money where their mouth is and help protect those communities.
And just to jump in with one final thought, in terms of signaling from key appointees within the incoming administration, Tom Holman, who was in charge of immigration enforcement before and is coming back in that role once again, has already cautioned trying to manage lawmakers' expectations related to the capacity of the administration to go out and enact mass deportations at scale, where, currently the administration has only so many resources afforded to them here in fiscal year 2025, absent some further congressional action. So he's purported to the media that the initial focus would be a list of approximately 1 to 2 million individuals who have already been identified by the Biden-Harris administration for removal because of criminal history. And so it's our understanding that the early actions that will be taken by the Trump administration will focus on that list of individuals that has been maintained by the current administration. But beyond that, I think we ought to be prepared for a potential show of force, and again, the congressional efforts to provide additional resources to enhance that capacity at the federal level.
Thank you both for that update. And obviously, I'll be working with the mayor to try to stay abreast of these things. And I think just even having these conversations and talking about it out loud is incredibly important. And then I was really happy to hear during the the election season, and to see on our legislative platform too the inclusion of early childhood, uh, uh, daycare, the care infrastructure, both for children as well for our elderly. And I know that obviously framing of these issues is so incredibly important as opportunities, but really to uplift it as an economic development opportunity and challenge as well. And so thinking through what we can do at the state and at the federal level to be able to bring in grants or other opportunities to really uplift the community so that they can be economically self-sustaining. And I don't know, Jen, if there were more opportunities that you were able to look at into in the last year since we added that.
Sure. So actually the campaign did, between, Vice President Harris and President-elect Trump actually called a lot of positive attention to these needs out there in the United States. And so what I want to say is along the campaign trail, President-elect Trump offered some campaign promises focused on this issue. Given the fact that we have opportunity at reforming the tax code this year, I would just call attention to the fact that President Trump had proposed to allow parents with up to 4 children to deduct some of their child care expenses from their income taxes. He originally was proposing all child care expenses, obviously, given considerations around, deficit reduction. We'll see if his Republican colleagues buy into that. He also at one point proposed 6 weeks of paid maternity leave for mothers specifically, and an additional rebate of up to $1,200 a year for low income families who have children or newborns. And so there were some robust discussions on the campaign trail. Obviously, we need to see what that means in terms of the legislative agenda, but tax reform in this budget reconciliation process would present the most legitimate early opportunity to affect some of this policy. So I want to encourage you, as you're considering making the trip to DC in March for National League of Cities, or, engaging with your congressional delegation, over the weeks and months ahead, this represents an important first opportunity to advocate for some of those reforms at the federal level through the tax code. And then we can have other conversations about the budget and other legislation. Again, given the need to pass things through simple majority, reconciliation is likely the easiest way to go here.
Great, thank you.
Okay, so I will ask just a couple of questions and we'll go back around. I'm particularly curious at the state level about property insurance, especially given the fires and the broader exiting of companies from the state of California, insurance companies in particular. I had heard that there were some green shoots that were beginning with the reintroduction, but that was prior to the Los Angeles fires. So as of however many hours ago, what is the current mood in Sacramento on this topic?
Mayor, great question. I like your phrase of green shoots. The insurance commissioner, I think what you're referring to is the insurance commissioner put out a bunch of draft regs about changes he wanted to see happen from insurance companies, and then the Pacific Palisades and other fires started. What's happening right now is, number one, a huge desire to make sure homeowners and their policies remain intact, to ensure that claims go forward and are covered to the full extent. The governor has been laser focused on the redevelopment of the areas that have been impacted. He put forward, and I could send the team a memo because we kept track. I think he's got about 9 executive orders about fast tracking various housing approvals. There's also a little bit of wait and see. Okay, insurance commissioner, this has happened. What are you going to do? And if not, I would say a strong majority of the legislature is chomping at the bit to push something forward. We have heard rumors that Pro Tem McGuire might put something forward as to a way to force the insurance commissioner's hands. Right now, since it's still early in the ledge process, again, about a week and a half in, we haven't seen actual legislative proposals in print that are worth really sharing other than just talking about it. But in a nutshell, there is there is a strong, strong, strong desire that insurance companies stay in California. They give the reimbursements to all the homeowners impacted. They no longer threaten to stop your coverage. They do not reject any of your claims. And the goal is to, those that have left or said they'll stop writing policies, the goal is to get them back. How exactly to be determined, but we're at just the very beginning of legislative process. And this is definitely, I would say, probably one of the top issues that the legislature and the governor himself really, really want to fix quickly. And again, remember that, as you all know, the insurance commissioner is a statewide office. It's a constitutional office. So there's a lot of, the spotlights are bright and are very, very much shining on him.
Okay. I'd like to then go to immigration in particular, the extensive discussion that we've had already. One of the more, I think, difficult parts of this is that we as a city with many, many, many people that were born in other countries, we have a very rich population of immigrants in the city of San Leandro who bring significant diversity to our city. I think there's just a lot of fear that's been created by the administration. And so we've got that sort of really heartfelt challenge, and we're looking for ways to try to assuage people's concerns. And I've heard you talk about the realities that ICE has limited personnel, a certain amount of budget, and that they are allegedly focusing on an already existing list of individuals. But one of the more disconcerting things that I heard was this concept of deputizing local law enforcement. And so I'm curious about, we can talk here internally about the legality of that. I'm a very strong believer that we control our own resources. But I'm curious to know if you see legal evolution occurring, or if you believe that that law, that section of the law, of the code has been tested in a way that would impact us negatively.
One thing I would have to offer on the 287G program model. So first and foremost, that Section 287G refers to a provision that was included in the Legal Immigration Reform and Immigrant Responsibility Act of 1996, which authorized, through the Immigration and Nationality Act, for ICE to delegate authorities to state and local law enforcement partners to perform specific immigration officer functions under the agency's direction and oversight. Now, one thing I am anticipating, again, as the incoming administration, comes back and assesses, which levers they can pull, obviously applying additional requirements to federal grant conditions, is a way to incentivize state and local governments to cooperate with levels of coordination that are considered voluntary in some way. But I do think there is somewhat of an evolution going on. I would refer back to the letters that were distributed by America First Legal, in which several Republican governors, including the governor of the state of Utah, for instance, were cited for sort of a lack of proactive coordination in delegating some of these authorities, or a state level preclusion for local officials to enter into these agreements. Now, typically there's two program models under 287G, and that includes jail enforcement. So obviously you would need to be tasked with administration of your jails, which the city typically won't oversee. That's a county function for the most part. And then there's the warrant service officer program, which would allow ICE to train, certify, and authorize state and local law enforcement officers to serve or execute administrative warrants to non-citizens within an agency's jail. So again, county versus city becomes an important line here. But one other thing I just want to flag in terms of potentially complicating or changing the equation in terms of enforcement priorities, I will say there's been a lot of attention on Capitol Hill this week for the fact that the House passed with bipartisan support the Laken-Riley Act, which is now being considered in the Senate and appears poised to pass the Senate. which would require DHS to detain non-US nationals who have been arrested for either burglary, theft, larceny, or shoplifting. So, again, this would be sort of an expansion of enforcement priorities for different offenses now. And so it's worth considering what impact this would have on local law enforcement at a time where obviously the state has been very focused on, deterring retail crime. So just something, again, for your awareness, as things are pretty fast moving back here in terms of the changing federal landscape.
The last thing there, so just to run with this concept of the changing landscape and the terminology. As I've done my research and chatted with residents, the need locally for compassion and caring for people that are really in a vulnerable situation is paramount. And that's tied with people feeling pretty strongly about criminal activity not being acceptable. So we've got both of these things. And I think that sometimes there's a conflation of those issues. And so now, so here's more like the again, trying to read the tea leaves and the evolution of what this means. Is there a sense that the focus is primarily on individuals involved in retail theft and homicides and in what we would call nefarious criminal activity, as opposed to maybe breaking a technical law but not really hurting other people?
I would just say, and this is my personal opinion here, whereas the Biden administration was very clear in their enforcement priorities around the most violent offenders, I think we're looking at a reprioritization, and to the extent that capacity empowers them to do it, again, the certain bills on the table right now, such as the Lincoln Riley Act, will reprioritize and encourage the incoming administration to prioritize resources to detaining folks who are charged with what you might refer to as lesser nonviolent offenses. And if given the opportunity to do so, I do think there is just a political interest in proving a point if afforded the opportunity to prove that point in any cities that have been struggling with management of public safety, et cetera. So I would just say, to the extent that folks are aware and there is clear directive, if federal law enforcement officials or immigration officials become aware of an opportunity, I would believe that they will likely try to take those opportunities to make an example early in the administration.
Thank you. At this point in time, I'd like to kind of go back around. So I've got a copy of the legislative platforms for both the state legislative platform and the federal legislative platform. Some of what we've talked about is already in those platforms. So what I'd like to be able to do is, if to the extent that we want to make amendments to the platform, so we kind of go to the platform and say a little bit about what we'd like to see changed, if anything, and then engage on a discussion on those specific topics. And I'll give you one example. Councilmember Aguilar, I believe the PFAS, there's at least discussion in our federal platform already. I don't know if you'd like to amend it or if you're satisfied with the answers that you got and we're fine. But that would be an example where I'd like to take the conversation to the platform so that we can give as clear direction as possible. Starting with Councilmember Viveros Walton.
Being that, I guess, the city's already a sanctuary jurisdiction, I just would like to have a discussion on whether we want to, we're already a designated jurisdiction. Do we need that additionally to the platform, or should we just kind of wondering what's the best way to address it if it's already a policy that we have in place, and kind of to figure out what the state's going to do first and how that intersects with our work here. I would like to see it included, but if it doesn't make sense at this point, since it's already a policy?
Yes, at this point in time, I mean, I was looking through the policies and the things that we promote, the things that we're interested in. We talk about various elements of immigration. We talk about elements of meeting people's needs at multiple levels. And so what we know is that we know out of Sacramento, we have specific interest in addressing the removal of states' rights and local rights by the federal government. I'm going to ask Jen if you'd like to weigh in on that in particular, right? Because we're seeing this tension between states' rights and federal rights. Because I saw you had your hand raised, and so I didn't know exactly where you wanted to weigh in.
I just want to be very straightforward with all of our local government officials who share similar concerns. Where you have coverage from a partner at the state level, I would just encourage all localities to be considerate of utilizing that coverage to avoid undue targeting by potential incoming federal officials in terms of your use of certain terminologies and any adoption of certain, statuses that I fear will only call attention to certain members of your community. And I'm happy to have further conversations with you all about that. But I would just offer that if it is unnecessary because your governor is offering certain policies at the state level, there is an element of calling attention to oneself here that I think could be detrimental to what I'm hearing being expressed by the council members.
Thank you. So then I'm just wondering how nimble we can be if, we do have, just wondering, I guess we can introduce an emergency. If something were to happen in San Leandro, we still have the flexibility to call a special meeting or at the next council meeting, submit an item for 14, 11, whatever that number, 11. So as long as that remains the option and kind of to figure out what we can do, then I'm okay with not having it as something that we advocate. I see this document as something that we advocate for, as opposed to kind of keeping. So my other question is around Lake Shore Road and wondering where that would fit for that inclusion. We had a discussion at a previous work session, but I want to I looked through both the state and the federal platforms, and wondering if I'm missing something where we can include that. It's not particularly pedestrian safety.
So in the federal platform, there is advocacy work, and we have been back there in DC, specifically around transportation infrastructure. So it would be on the last page of the platform as we pursue federal dollars.
It's the federal.
So in this particular case, we offer a clarifying, not a limiting description, but as an example, we talk about alignment to Vision Zero. But the first sentence is, or the beginning is just a blanket statement that we will pursue infrastructure funding for transportation.
To the chair.
Yes.
Jen has her hand up, wants to say something.
Thank you.
And just from a staffing perspective, particularly given the fact that we've got this transition in the executive branch, I believe it's always helpful for us to be less than prescriptive with our project titles, because it may require that we either phase the project given some of the minimum or maximum award size. So being slightly less descriptive here about the project actually may benefit us in seeking various federal funding streams over the next year. So I would just piggyback off what the mayor was saying in terms of allowing us the flexibility if there's a need to pursue multiple federal funding streams, that we're allowed to adapt project title or phase accordingly, if that makes sense.
Okay, thank you.
So given our discussion, the descriptions, and just for the benefit of the public, if you haven't had a chance to read them, the state legislative platform is approximately 10 pages, covering various elements of what we are pursuing. It's not particularly prescriptive to a specific program, but rather they're conceptual. We're pursuing different elements. It's pretty thorough. The federal legislative platform is approximately 5 pages. It's a little bit higher level because the federal money tends to be at a little bit higher level. And so corresponding, that's not quite so surprising. At this point in time, I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring the conclusion to an end, or bring the discussion to a conclusion. So we'll end with this item and move to the next, with the recognition that we can have emails and further discussion before this comes to a final vote in case there's a desire to tweak. But I think big picture, it sounds like our interests, our concerns are reflected in the broad language of the platform, and that we can go and advocate in DC and in Sacramento for our areas of interest. I'm seeing consensus. So that's how we will proceed. Moving to our next item on the agenda, we've got item 3B, which is a Council Brown Act and Governance Training presentation. And we've got City Attorney Rich Pierotta, who will be undertaking this or guiding us through this training.
Thank you, Mayor. Good evening, Council. This is Richard Pierotta. I'm the City Attorney, and this is your Brown Act and Governance training for today, as we want to recognize that there are other trainings that you will be required to take, and I'll mention those in the coming slides. So we can dive right in. We'll talk about the Brown Act, which of course are the state's open meeting laws, the City Council roles and responsibilities, which are contained in the Charter and the Municipal Code. We'll talk briefly about parliamentary procedure, and finally end with rules of decorum. Just general overview, prevailing best practices that we're seeing out in other jurisdictions, especially in these difficult times, obviously, because of new administration, but also just the general tenor of democracy. Brown Act, open meeting requirements, we know them. We comply with them. We want to just go over them and provide some tips, best practices, advice. First of all, we know all meetings of legislative bodies, and of course the City Council is the supreme legislative body in San Leandro, shall be open and public. What is a legislative body? Of course, it's yourselves as the City Council, the governing body. It's any body that you appoint. And here in San Leandro, we appoint and formalize our boards and commissions in our municipal code. Those are your appointed bodies. And then finally, your standing committees of the City Council, your Rules Committee, Finance Committee, Facilities and Transportation. All of those bodies have to comply strictly with the Brown Act's open and noticed public meetings. Occasionally, you will form an ad hoc committee that is comprised of less than a quorum of the council. That is not a legislative body that has to have an agenda, a notice of meetings. They can meet at any time, but it has to be less than a quorum of only the members of the City Council. So for example, if you said we wanted to create an ad hoc committee that includes the city manager as a member, that would not be an ad hoc committee. It has to be comprised solely of the members of the legislative body. The Brown Act, of course, defines the meaning. The Brown Act's in the Government Code, California Government Code, and 54950 in sequitur. The definitions are all in the Brown Act. They provide that a meeting, of course, is a majority of yourselves at the same time and place to hear, discuss, or deliberate on an item of business that's within the city's jurisdiction. There are many exceptions: going to conferences, NLC, LOCC, going to community meetings that are not sponsored by the city. such as an HOA meeting. Social or ceremonial occasions, of course, individual contacts, I'll comment on that in just a second. Going to standing committees. However, we want to be careful that if a fourth member of the council goes to a standing committee, which they can do, they may not participate in that standing committee's meeting. They can just observe. They can't even make public comment at the standing committee meeting if they are not a member of that standing committee. They can, of course, go and observe, educate themselves, but they cannot participate, including public comment. And finally, meetings of other legislative bodies, for example, the Board of Supervisors. If a majority of the City Council goes to a Board of Supervisors meeting, that is not your meeting, that is not the City of San Leandro City Council meeting. A majority may go and attend. I want to be clear, though, and we caveat this, is that once you're there, if a majority of the council are at, for example, the Board of Supervisors meeting, be careful not to look or seem as if you are meeting together and talking about city business at that other meeting. That could be perceived by a member of the public or any interested stakeholder as an illegal meeting of the city council that should have been occurring in an open and noticed public meeting for the city. So again, when you're at a ceremonial occasion, where you're at a conference, please be careful when congregating together. You don't want to make it appear or having, please don't have conversations about city business. I know it's hard, but we want to make sure that you're advised. Serial meetings, that's what an illegal meeting is under the Brown Act, where a majority of you, as members of the city council, may not, outside of a meeting that's been called for the specific purposes of discussing San Leandro city business, use a series of communications, to discuss, deliberate, or take action on any item of business. As I said, individual contacts with council members amongst yourselves are okay. The Brown Act does not prevent employees, such as us, myself, and the city manager, and yourselves, or even amongst yourselves, from engaging in separate conversations outside of an open and noticed public meeting, provided that the comments or positions of other members are not communicated or shared. Really, it's an interesting conversation that you must have, but you have to be clear that you're not having conversations where you say, I know how X, Y, and Z feel or are going to act about a particular issue. Will you share with me what you're going to do? And I'll share with you what they're going to do. And then we've had a meeting and deliberated and discussed. It's more, again, having conversations that are communicative, that are provided questions and answers, but not sharing what you or may know about what another member knows amongst the group. This happens. How does this happen? A staff member, such as your city manager in a hub and spoke model, communicates with the individual members of the city council, seeking their one-on-one input, and in that process reveals other members' positions in advance of a public meeting. That's a serial meeting. That's a violation of the Brown Act. I know your city manager is careful, as well as myself, in those conversations with each and every one of you, which we know you meet individually with the city manager. If you were to meet, and you do meet individually myself, I would be careful. Amongst yourselves, I would advise, please be careful in those situations. You don't want to be the hub that creates a hub and spoke serial meeting. Similarly, there's the daisy chain, which we all sort of know from our children's games. Member A contacts member B, sometimes called the telephone game. Member B contacts member C, etc., until a quorum, 4 of you, have discussed, deliberated, or acted. How does this all get evidenced, you may ask? Through social media or emails, and I'll talk more about social media in a bit. Of course, the informal nature of email communications is ripe for inadvertent Brown Act violations where there's a reply all to a particular piece of information and correspondence by email, or a post on social media that can also create a meeting that was not open and noticed in public in violation of the Brown Act. Social media, the Brown Act also addresses this particular issue, and I want to be clear, this has been around, you've been trained on it before, but it's worth remembering because we are obviously using social media, the city is using social media to communicate, and that members of the city council may not respond directly to any communications posted on the internet, on social media, Facebook, Nextdoor, Instagram, etc., by other members of the city council regarding a matter within the jurisdiction of the city council. So this includes comments and digital icons. So for example, if Vice Mayor Bowen posts on her Facebook page and you're all friends with Vice Mayor Bowen and someone thumbs up that, you're not allowed to do that. Because then you could have a deliberation and an action that's not in an open notice public meeting over social media. So just be cautious and careful about when you do or react to posts by fellow members of the council. It applies obviously to all the social media platforms, blogs, for example, who uses blogs anymore, but it does. We know about closed sessions. Closed sessions are very specific and explicit exceptions to the open and public notice meeting requirement. They are all confidential by their definition, whether an attorney or your city attorney is in the room or not, to create the attorney-client privilege. If there are any actions taken in closed session and the range or scope of actions that could be taken in closed session is defined by the Brown Act, they're required to be publicly reported out after the action's taken. There are what can be discussed in closed session is specifically prescribed by the statute. These are just examples here. This is not the whole list, but these are the main ones that I think the community and you are all familiar with that we routinely see in closed session discussions. We cannot go into closed session without having an agenda posted, except for a very limited exception, which I'll talk about in a second. That is here. We know, and your staff, your amazing city clerk, your city manager, they regularly post well in advance of 72 hours your regular meeting agendas. For special meetings, we even do go above and beyond that in almost 99.9% instances. We post special meetings to the extent we have them well in advance of 24 hours, but 24 hours is all that's required for special meeting postings, which we know. There are some specific exceptions, emergencies. I want to be aware that we do not have to post if there's an emergency, and knock on wood, we don't have one here, but obviously this is a big deal going on now for all jurisdictions in California, in Southern California specifically, is that they're probably having, their legislative bodies are probably having meetings in emergency situations, and they don't have to post, but they do have to report to local media after the meeting that there wasn't a meeting. So there are some specific exceptions that we would help you through if there were an emergency. Finally, as I just talked about, if there's an urgency item where a need for immediate action, that's important, need for immediate action, came to the city's attention between the Wednesday when we post the agenda and the Monday, it's 5 days, after the posting of the agenda, and we need to take immediate action in order to preserve something for the city, the council by a 2/3 vote could add that item that was not already posted on the regular meeting agenda to that meeting's agenda to take action or discuss it. It is the exception, obviously not the rule. It is very judicially managed here in San Leandro. It is not often invoked, and we are very careful about, your city manager, of course, is very careful about forward planning. You see the forward regular meeting agendas. Things are well planned here to avoid these situations. Again, those are the exceptions. We know that the public have a right to participate in our meetings, but I want to be clear, these are your meetings. This is the city council's meeting to do its business. The public have a right to attend, to observe, and then participate at the pleasure, in ways, in the courtesy of the city council. We have to provide them the right to participate, but we provide them that right in very courteous and structured ways, which we are allowed to do under the Brown Act. We must provide an opportunity for the public to speak regarding any matter within the city's jurisdiction. We can briefly discuss these items and refer matters to staff, which we know sometimes come up during general public comment on items not on the agenda, but we know we cannot take action on those items. We usually refer them, if we need to subsequent regular meetings. We want to make sure that the public has a right to address the city council before we take action, and definitely during the consideration of the item. The public has a right to make audio and video recordings as long as they're not infringing upon someone else's right here in the room to view or participate or attend the meeting. So we generally know that if someone is blocking someone's view, we can ask them to move. If their recording equipment is loud or a distraction, we can ask them to move it, figure out a way to reduce the distraction. But the public has a right to make audio and video recordings, even if we are, of course, audio and video and Zoom recording our meetings. Teleconference rules, we know that they have changed. I'm going to go over them briefly here. We call the traditional rules, which you all know about, where an agenda is posted at the locations with the teleconference location specifically identified at the front of the agenda. Again, your city clerk contacts you. We have a policy, internal policy, where you have to provide that information to the city clerk of where you're going to be. We need that address. It needs to be at an ADA accessible location, wherever it is in the world. And you have to provide the ability for the public to attend that meeting. So if you're at a hotel and you don't want to use the business center, you want to use your hotel room, you have to be comfortable having the public come to your hotel room, wherever it may be, and they can participate in the meeting from that hotel room. Usually there's a business center, use the business center, use the conference center, et cetera. That also means that you have to post the agenda somewhere, somehow. We assist you with that by providing you the materials to post that on a door, on the external window, et cetera. Usually most hotels understand when that happens. At least a quorum of the city council must participate from locations within city boundaries that are ADA accessible. So in a teleconference situation, and this doesn't happen here that often, but you may imagine that you're in a large county. Let's say you're in North Tehama County, and you have a spread out jurisdiction. It does happen that individual members participate teleconference from different locations within the county. And they are allowed to do that as long as they're, again, ADA accessible, they post it, et cetera. They don't all come together in the middle of the county because they may be far apart. If you use teleconference, you have to do roll call votes only. For a teleconference, again, under the traditional rules, there's no limit on the number of meetings this can be used. There's no requirement to provide similar options for the public as far as the teleconference. If our Zoom falls apart during a teleconference meeting, that's okay. We can continue on with the meeting because at that point, the Zoom capability, meeting capability is provided as a courtesy. However, we have AB 2449, which I know we're all familiar with. This came out of COVID-19, of course, after the governor's order had expired, 2022 or so. This provides alternative teleconference procedures for you individually as council members. Here, at least a quorum of the council must participate from a singular physical location. So that means 4 of you have to be here. Usually it's here in City Hall, sometimes Sterling Grant, wherever, to participate under AB 2449. This is really about individual members and their individual circumstances where the legislature has determined it is helpful because of COVID-19 or other communicable diseases or issues with family that are dealing with such diseases. In this case, under AB 2449, a council member can teleconference. Teleconference, incidentally, also includes video conference. It's interchangeable under the law. In just cause or in emergency circumstances that are in the emergency circumstances case approved by the rest of the city council. If a member invokes just cause, the city council does not have to approve that participation. And a member, I'll point this out, can only teleconference under AB 2449. We'll call it the new rules for a limited number of meetings. There has to be a qualifying circumstance in order for an individual member to participate under AB 2449 exception. It has to be just cause, and these are the just cause reasons. There's only 4 of them, and those are there listed in the slide. Or emergency circumstances means a physical or family, a medical emergency. And for under AB 2302, which just went into effect this January 1st, it's only allowed because we meet twice a month. We're one of those jurisdictions that meets more often than many others. It's allowed for 7 meetings per year. But it doesn't change the just cause limit, which is only twice per year. So there used to be this somewhat complicated formula of how many percentage of meetings you could attend under emergency. It's just now 7 meetings. Just know that 2 of those meetings could be for just cause. That means 5 could be for emergency circumstances, or all 7 could be for emergency circumstances. Hopefully, it's not always going to be that because emergency means medical emergency. If you are a family member, we don't want to hear that that's the case every single time. There are some specific rules under AB 2449 for participation by an individual council member who is invoking 2449. That means we have to vote if in an emergency circumstance, like I said. You have to provide a general description of the reason at the meeting, but you still have to be able to comply with HIPAA regulations and disclosure and privacy, which we would be careful to make sure, and my office is here to assist in those disclosures or descriptions. You have to identify any adult in the room with you as the member, and you must participate through audio and visual technology. The video has to be on the entire time. And the public must be provided the option of participating in the meeting through similar audio and visual technology. If the city's audio visual or Zoom capability crashes while we're in an AB 2449 meeting, we cannot continue that meeting under AB 2449. If that member who was participating as an AB 2449 member leaves the meeting and becomes absent from the rest of the meeting, then the council can resume the meeting, because the reason for the AB 2449 exception has fallen off. But that's a very limited circumstance and it hasn't happened to my knowledge. Maybe once, Kelly. Yeah, and then we recovered it. There are consequences for violating the Brown Act. I want to be clear that the nullification of a decision made in violation of the Brown Act is a clear possibility. So it could nullify a previous action taken. Of course, willful violations, just like in many of the laws that apply to you as public officials, could incur criminal penalties. Willful violation is a misdemeanor. There's a possible and significant award of attorney's fees to the party that successfully brings a Brown Act lawsuit. They have to go through some procedural requirements, which is a cure and correct letter first. So there are some built-in mitigations in the Brown Act that we would follow, that they would have to follow, and that we would be able to invoke. But finally, violations of the Brown Act create loss of public confidence, affect how the council is perceived as far as the exercise of democracy, and something we want to be careful about. That concludes the Brown Act part of this training. I'll keep on going. We do have questions at the end, Mayor, we'll take, and we have public comment. City Council roles and responsibilities. This is the part of the presentation where I want to talk about and present to you, make sure you understand best practices, but also just clearly what defines your legislative role. You also have a quasi-judicial role, which you will exercise next week related to an appeal. Doesn't always happen every single meeting, but it's important. And Councilmember Veras-Walton, you said we wanted to talk about what that means when you're in a quasi-judicial role. We'll talk about that right now. We'll finally talk about some best practices. This is all directly from the municipal code and charter. A little bit of it is coming from the government code as it applies to cities, but generally we know we have a charter. You are the legislative body, you are the city council, the supreme governing body in the city. You establish city ordinances and regulations. You do approve, of course, the most important document in the city, which is the city budget, and you approve contracts above $100,000. The city manager approves contracts $100,000 or less. You, of course, determine the city goals and policy priorities every single meeting, but also primarily in your city council retreat, which is coming up February 1st, and you have once a year. You hire, appoint, and evaluate the city manager, the city attorney. The charter also provides that you appoint the city clerk. However, the charter also says that the city council can delegate that by ordinance to the city manager. So that has happened. I don't remember exactly when it happened. It was many years ago, I think in the 1990s, that the ordinance was passed. So the city clerk is currently under the city manager's jurisdiction, but you still approve the appointment as recommended by the city manager of your city clerk. Your roles. No council member, I want to be clear, has an individual authority to bind or act on behalf of the city council. You act as a body. You vote. You decide together. The mayor has no greater authority than other council members, except as defined by the charter, and I won't read them all individually, but they are laid out here. I wanted to make sure it was clear that the mayor has specific and defined prescribed powers that we'll talk about a little bit more in the coming slides. But that's essentially your roles. Any power that is not already delegated by state law is delegated to the city council. The mayor has some specific over and above powers that are defined by the charter. The council, as I said, is responsible. You are responsible for setting goals, policy, adopting ordinances that are the laws and have the effect of law, and administrative procedures similarly have the effect, where the city manager, your delegated professional, your appointed professional, is responsible for implementation of your goals, your policies, your ordinances, and your administrative procedures. Of course, the city manager is responsible for personnel. Everyone works for the city manager, except for everyone works for the city manager here in the city. The city manager and I, as a city attorney, work for you directly. We are your direct reports. And thus, the city manager is responsible for day-to-day operations. As I said, the city council as a body, not individual members, can give direction to the city manager, and that's defined by Charter Section 345, provided here for you to read and absorb. Staff. We know then the council may not direct staff. Clear. Requests for information should be directed to your city manager. And of course, your city manager, it's her discretion to authorize you to have direct communication with staff. And in that sense, the city manager should be copied on communications with staff, which should be limited. Again, communications with staff, if the city manager authorizes it by email, for example, should be copied to the city manager. If you're having a verbal discussion, you should know that that staff member, not going to be a secret, will most likely convey to your city manager pretty quickly the conversation they had with you. So don't be under any pretense that any of that's going to be secret. They're going to be communicating your communications, verbal communications, oral communications with them directly to your city manager. This is a best practice that I've seen many other jurisdictions say is a caution in this case is critical because staff may, of course, misinterpret requests, questions, or comments from the council. We don't want any misunderstandings, no misinterpretations. That's why communications directly with your city manager. What about public communications? As council members, you want to be clearly identified when you're speaking on behalf of yourself, but you're always, almost always, but always, in almost all other instances, you're going to be speaking on behalf of yourself as a council member. There are specific exceptions that are very clearly defined. For example, under the Brown Act, you could waive a requirement from closed session. You can vote to disclose information. The council has to vote, and then at that point, council members may be able to speak if they are prompted or they are approved by the rest of the council. These are very specific situations. Otherwise, members should pass along communications concerns that are public communications that pertain to city business directly to your city manager for assistance. And we, of course, have an amazing PIO to assist the city manager, and yourselves through the city manager on public communications should you choose to make those. The mayor, on behalf of the council, again, going back to those defined powers under Charter Section 305, speaks on behalf of the city council in the city. And of course, like I said, the city manager and designated staff, the PIO, are generally the only individuals authorized to speak with media on behalf of the city, media trained professionals. If comments are made by council members, we want to make sure, my advice, best practice, is that they need to be consistent with city council approved policies, legislation, and/or actions. If an item is pending, still under discussion, coming up for a regular meeting agenda or special meeting for discussion, and you want to speak on it, please know and caveat that you are speaking on behalf of yourself, not on the behalf of the whole council. You, of course, if you're speaking at external agencies or boards, comments and positions should again be approved by a council, legislation, policies, or actions. If you're speaking in an individual capacity, my advice is specifically identify that you're speaking on behalf of yourself. You can identify yourself as a council member of the city, council member Brian Azevedo, District 2, but I'm not on behalf of the council. Let's be clear on that. When serving as the city's representative on a regional board or JPA, Councilmember Aguilar, the Mosquito Bay District, for example, Keep the council informed of important issues, which of course you're really good at, notifying us of what's happened. And when necessary or as advised by that JPA, EBDA, for example, council members, you seek council approval, right, on significant policy issues or decisions or positions, making sure that it's part of your report, or if it needs to be on an agenda, talking with the city manager about putting on an agenda for discussion, potential action. Electronic communications or other written correspondence as a representative of the city, you're encouraged to refer that draft correspondence that's going out to the community to the city manager for input and advice. If you receive a response, you should forward any response to the city manager. Another best practice here, because the mayor under Chapter 305 is a spokesperson, it'd be good to copy the mayor as well, or inform the mayor in advance and get that input as well, just to make sure that everyone's on the same page, since the mayor is speaking on behalf of the city and the city council. So seeking input, advice, another way to just avoid misunderstandings, misinterpretations. A reminder, your email communications, whether you use it, and I'll point this out again during the Public Records Act portion of the training, email communications, whether it's from your personal email address, Councilmember Bolt, dylanbolt.com, or from your city email address, are public records if they relate to city business. That means that they're subject to Brown Act issues related to reply alls, like we talked about, avoiding serial meetings, but also the Public Records Act. And our office, in coordination with the city clerk, has a procedure when Public Record Act requests are made for your emails if they're from your private email account or from your text messages. I'll again talk about this in a second. Could be public records. I want to be clear. Anything related to city business that you do on personal devices, on your personal email accounts, on any other personal communications medium, your iPads, your personal iPad, personal computer, personal laptop, could be public records. We talked about training that might be coming. We first of all must know, we're going to have our Form 700s for Councilmember Bolt. Should have filed your assuming office Form 700. If you haven't, I would touch base with the city clerk on that, but I think you probably have already. If not, that's okay. We'll figure it out with Kelly. And we have to have AB 1234 ethics training. That's every 2 years, so you might be due for that. And Kelly can provide, excuse me, Ms. Clancy, the city clerk, can provide information on where training resources are located. They're usually online resources. It's a mandatory 2 hours of training. That training is also required of your city boards and commissions that are in the municipal code. They'll be required to take AB 1234 training. And then you as the council, and of course, management staff required to have sexual harassment prevention training every 2 years. And I'll talk about that sexual harassment prevention training towards the end of the presentation as part of some other information and knowledge transfer that I think you should be aware of. Let's talk briefly about the Public Records Act I just pointed out. What is a public record? Again, any tangible thing containing information relating to the conduct of the city's business that's prepared, owned, used, or retained by the city, regardless of its physical form or characteristics. Paper, email, text messages, all social media posts, all of that is public record. You should assume that everything that's provided to you, everything that you generate is going to be public and disclosable unless there's an exemption that applies, and the exemptions are prescriptive and specific and limited. So I would advise you in communicating, especially through email, just don't put anything in email that you wouldn't want to see put out there that would be embarrassing. It's just clearly what we say to our staff. Email is a transitory communication. You should know that we retain it for 2 years. Your emails are retained for 2 years. There's an automatic purging every single day of those emails. But if you save that email into a permanent archive or a permanent storage system within the city, it'll be kept beyond that 2-year retention period. Email is meant to be transitory. I don't believe we use Slack. We don't use any messaging except for Teams. Teams messaging. If you use Teams messaging, that is also a public record, and that's also retained within the Teams system. So again, putting anything in writing, please, please, please be careful. Basically, anything you say as council members is already going to be perceived as city business. So we want to be careful about whatever you put in email. It may not be exempt from disclosure. We are very careful about exemptions and working very closely with your city clerk's office. We have a GovQA public records management system that is very robust. We direct folks to requests, a lot of repeat requests, and they are in the GovQA system. But any new, fresh, original communications, correspondence, please be judicious in your use of emails, Teams, text messages. We have a duty, just briefly, to assist requesters in identifying records and information that is responsive to the requests. Sometimes they ask for information, and we can provide that information. You have amazing staff who are able to just answer questions on the fly without having to resort to doing public records requests. We have a specific routine for how we handle Public Records Act requests, and I would defer to your city clerk's office, which works closely with my office, when we're responding. There are many, like I said, there are exemptions to disclosure of public records. These are just a few that are probably the most applicable for what the city does. They are limited. There is a catch-all, but we are very careful and judicious about how to apply the catch-all to particular records. Again, if something is embarrassingly said, if you have a conversation with a constituent over email or over text that may not be exactly on the up and up, I just want to be clear, please be careful what you put in writing. All of it essentially could be disclosed under the Public Records Act. I've been hammering this. This is just want to be clear that the law had changed regarding this because there was a argument that text messages and emails on private communications devices were not retained by the city. Well, yeah, of course. I am provided a stipend for the use of my personal phone because I don't want to carry two phones. Same goes for employees. We're required to reimburse them if we use their personal phones for city business. But that then opens up that personal phone to city business Public Records Act requests, which we just want to be careful about, like I just said, because anything related to public, it doesn't matter if it's not retained by the city anymore. In a sense, if it's not retained by the city, it may be because of a very specific law. It may be because of a specific procedure that's defined, that's unrelated to the way that we retain documents and records. So the retention requirement has been more narrowly defined. Social media. There was just recently a Supreme Court opinion about social media use by public officials, which I think was helpful. I think it's going to be helpful because what it means now, social media use by public officials constitutes state action, constitutes a city action only if the public official possessed actual authority to speak on the city's behalf. Only the mayor here in San Leandro has actual authority. Or if the council by resolution or some other action says, Councilmember Azevedo, you can speak on behalf of the city on this particular issue. Then you possess actual authority to speak on behalf of the city, but only as to that defined matter or issue, and purported to exercise that authority when they spoke on social media. So what are the court's recommendations, which I think I've adopted as my own here, is that when you're making social media posts in your role as a city council member, confirm that you have no authority to speak on behalf of the city. You maybe don't have to do that because it already exists in the charter, if that seems cumbersome in making your posts. I would say include a label, I'm advising, include a label or disclaimer. You could put a general one that's always out there on your posts or on your social media account, making clear that it's your personal statement, not on behalf of the city. So then you want to avoid making your own announcements of governmental actions exclusively on your social media account. What that means is that you want to be more widespread about your announcements. You can link, of course, the city has an amazing PIO team. They're sharing otherwise available information about city events, city conferences, city parties, all things city related are social media accounts. You can link to them, you can post them, you can push them. That's okay. And finally, just be careful about blocking. We used to have some advice about blocking users on your council member social media accounts. Again, if you aren't authorized to speak, which you aren't, generally, except for the mayor, and you include a personal disclaimer that you put on the face page of your Facebook page, for example, you're likely free to block those who are making comments that are not germane, making comments that don't pertain to or are not relevant, are harassing, essentially. However, I would just say if someone's doing harassing behavior over a social media account, they're most likely violating their user agreement. And we have tools to inform the social media parties, social media companies that, hey, this person's violating your user agreement. They should be banned, they should be blocked, etc. So there are multiple ways to address those types of behaviors on social media as a council member. We're going to talk briefly about some laws that apply generally to you all that you'll also get in your AB 1234, but have some specific application here to remember as we get to talking about quasi-judicial versus your legislative role. Not only under the Political Reform Act for economic interests, under Government Code 1090, you know that economic interests in which you are a party to a contract, you have a conflict of interest. Did you know you also have a conflict of interest if you have a common law or a bias for or against a particular position, issue, matter, person, company, entity that's coming before the city council? State law, through court opinions, says that you as city council members, as a public officer, you have to exercise the powers. These are powers to be a council member, make decisions, conferred on you with disinterested, unbiased skill, zeal, and diligence, and primarily for the benefit of the public. This is sometimes in the public entity context, your duty to act fairly and impartially. You cannot be tempted by personal or pecuniary interests when making decisions here at the dais. It applies to non-financial interests, political interests, other interests that may not have a financial effect on you or your family. What it means is that it disqualifies you from participating in a discussion or action. You need to recuse yourself from any action or discussion on that particular issue, matter, person, entity, company, etc., that comes before the council. Because you can't act impartially. You can't, you could be accused, and there's allegations that could prevent you from being able to act in a way that's unbiased, impartial, or disinterested. So I want to be careful and be clear that you'll get this training again in AB 1234, but it's worth here because when you're acting in a quasi-judicial capacity, that's what due process requires. 99% of the time here, you are acting in a legislative role. You have immunity in so many ways as a member when you're speaking on legislation that affects the city, when you're passing an ordinance, approving a resolution for a contract or a policy. When you're acting in a way that's a judge and jury, which you are, and that's unique in this aspect, you have to provide substantive due process, which means you have to be a fair and unbiased decision maker. You can't have a position that's locked in for or against someone coming before you in an appeal. You also have to be clear that you have no conflicts of interest. Act without reproach in that respect, because they may be able to allege some type of conflict of interest under the Political Reform Act. We want to make sure you know under the Levine Act, if you receive political contributions from an individual, from a company, you can't act in relation to that. Law has just recently changed. So that's the substance due process part of it. The second half of it is procedural due process, where you as the quasi-judicial decision maker have to ensure that staff has done its job by providing notice and providing an opportunity to be heard to the appellant and to the respondent. Usually the respondent is the city. We, the staff, we are enforcing our laws that come before you, and someone is appealing a decision, a discretionary decision. And you also have to, under procedural due process, equal time and provided equal notice or notice that followed the code, and that the city followed its own processes and procedures, and that means you followed the city's processes and procedures, the zoning code, the charter, the municipal code, et cetera. We have, under the administrative code, we're required to follow Robert's Rules of Order. We just know that we do basic principles. We have to have a quorum. A quorum is 4 members of the city council without exception. That means that the council can only act with a vote of 4. All members have equal rights, privileges, and obligations when seated here at the dais. No person should speak until recognized by the chair. Again, that's a Robert's Rules requirement. And only one question at a time, and only one person may have the floor at any one time. We know that there are general procedures, either just a basic member makes a main motion, a second is required. The motion to amend is in Robert's Rules, but here we have a practice that's quite collegial and thoughtful and courteous, in that council custom practice to suggest friendly amendments to makers of the motion without having to formally say, I motion to amend. It's more in the discussion, in the democratic process that we've established here. That's what we do. And then finally, with substitute motions, that motion takes precedence over the main motion that's before the council. If a substitute motion passes, then that's what passes. And the main motion is done. The substitute motion is the motion that passes. We know that I think you're all familiar and happy to discuss it more at a later time. Point of information, point of order, you can make those to the chair. We hear calling the question, again, a practice is that if a question is called and nobody rises up to say, well, I'd like to vote on that, calling the question does require a second. It's not debatable. It requires a 2/3 vote if someone invokes it. So we want to be clear, usually as questions are called, if someone says point of order, I'd like to vote on that calling the question, then there's a vote that's required. 2/3, 5 of you would have to approve that movement. If the call question doesn't get that 5 votes, then the debate continues. So I just want to be clear. Sometimes that happens. Rules of decorum. These are, again, not new and have been established by this council in the past. Most recently, February 25th, 2023, you have a useful laminated card at your desks, your individual desks, that establish attributes of high-functioning city councils and your council commitments to each other. Just, again, not having to read all through the slides, council manager relations, your city manager ensures you are not alone. You have a whole army of team. You have a team. You have the city staff. It's not your job as council members to solve specific problems as an individual council member. You set the policy and you hire your amazing city manager to carry it out. The city manager, provides council, you, with an orderly way to handle community concerns. It's also defined by the charter. For the purpose of inquiry, you can ask the city manager pretty much anything pertaining to city business. That's established by the charter. The administrative service of the city, the actual performance of the day-to-day functions goes through the city manager. We rely on that process, communicate to constituents that staff will handle complaints according to council policy. Not new, and I think talked about a lot, is that what we have here is a democratic process, and compromise is key. The effective governance of any legislative body requires negotiation, requires compromise, focusing on the city, shared city interests. Remember, your staff, myself, the city manager, we are duty bound to carry out council decisions. If we don't, and you've made a decision and openly insubordinate, that's grounds for discipline to a staff member by the city manager. So those policies that you pass are hugely important. If there's disagreement on a council directive, the hope, the understanding of the council from your staff is that you'll resolve it so that it's clear to all the parties, especially staff. So again, modeling civility up here, listening well in all your actions, being above reproach as a council member is so key, focusing on the long term of your policies, so important. And of course, being prepared, preparing yourself, while again, preparing others, asking staff questions before meetings, amazing practice. Even if you want the information provided at the meeting, giving your city manager a heads up, not springing surprises. You don't want to be surprised. We don't want to be surprised. We're not trying to surprise you. We want to make sure you are fully informed all the time, every time. And as much as possible, giving you an opportunity to ask questions. We're on your team. And communicating through the city manager, so important. It helps ensure that all the councilors receive the same information. We treat you all the same. And then, this is so important now, keeping cool during turbulence. We are not, be clear, what's happening in Southern California is absolutely horrible, and it could happen to us tomorrow. We know that. Fires, earthquakes, pandemics, social unrest, heavy rain events, we've had them all. They've all occurred in San Leandro in the last 5 years. It's amazing. So stay calm, trust your emergency managers. Expect the city manager to keep you informed at all times. Please don't interfere or get into the trenches. You have to show the public your job as council members is the policymakers. You are making the policy, not defining for individual issues or individual events or individual matters. Yes, you can take those in, take them in. We have Mobile 311, but if someone's calling you, they don't use a cell phone, they don't use a computer, absolutely. Convey that verbally, convey that by email to your city manager. Show the public you have confidence in the city's ability to respond. Consider, again, the entire community's interests when making decisions, not just individuals within that community. Yes, you represent districts, but you are representing the whole city. So I understand. You have a special place. You live in that district. You hear from that district. You see them every single day. Totally understandable. There's a way to communicate their individual concerns in a way that's constructive and proper, and your city manager has defined it. Again, as an elected official, just like us, we learn something every single day. It's part of the beauty of this job. It's a job, we understand. It's part of the beauty of being a council member is that you learn something new every single day. Your day is never boring. There's always variety. You're always communicating. You're always being thoughtful. It's a lot. It's hard. It takes a lot of energy, but it's so rewarding in that way that there's a lot of rigor to this work. And you do that work, again, through your council retreat as a body. You review your operations at that meeting. You review your strategic plan. Your city manager has a plan to help you facilitate the discussion and process. And you talk about your governance norms, which you do with your city council handbook. Maybe you have some ideas about thinking about and changing that. Review teamwork, your norms, your practices. You have a new council member. How are you all going to react to each other? How are you going to interact? How are you going to communicate? All going to be prepared. I'm looking at Janelle, be handled in the city council retreat. So be open. It's going to be a time for you all to think about how you want to work together, again, in keeping the community in mind. You do get this particular type of training in your sexual harassment training. We include it as a module when we do trainings. When I say we, when I talk about city attorney's office, Redwood Public Law, my firm, you hold a unique and influential role. This is coming directly from an amazing article in Western City Magazine, which is the LOCC's magazine that just came out January 1st, Daniel Drossel. You hold a unique and influential role. In the same magazine, in the same Western Cities, is an article about a study that was done about what's going on with council members, with elected officials, and just the difficulty and the stress of being up here in the job because of a reduction in confidence in government, just generally in the United States. We like to hope that you're going to hold us to higher standards and hold yourself to higher standards to defeat some of those findings that are just toxic behavior on the days, erodes public trust and the effective functioning of government institutions. It's not unique to this city, to this particular form of government. It's happening at school boards. It's happening at special districts. It's happening at big cities, small cities, Southern California, Northern California, all the way around. Workplace bullying is a unique situation here, is not a unique situation here in San Leandro. It's common now because of the erosion in public trust. And in doing so, preventing bullying in public meetings is to be prepared, asking questions, but not in an interrogative fashion, leading by example, using neutral language, showing appreciation when you can, when it's deserved, when it needs to be said, and again, not making things personal by remaining objective, by being objective and focused on the issues and the long-term thinking that's part of your jobs for the city. There are also times when this may occur, this type of behavior occurs outside of public view, and understanding that there's a distinct role of government, the council manager form of government that's enshrined in our charter and is the norm. We are not different from the rest of California as far as our council manager form of government. The city manager's role is the conduit for communication between the council and the staff. So again, like I said, maintaining clear lines of authority, preventing undue influence from individual council members, all important and already enshrined in state law. And that there's a clear separation of powers. And if you experience, so finally, if there's an experience or witness workplace, if someone experiences or they witness workplace bullying, as a staff, we are trained, behavior is reported to management or human resources. Upon a report, and this is again in AP 1000, which is the main administrative personnel policy, which you as council members will be trained on when you take the sexual harassment training. We impute the city's AP 1000 sexual harassment and discrimination policy to the council. So it's an important policy that's available online that we can provide to you if you wish, but that's what you would be trained upon related to sexual harassment, discrimination, and workplace bullying. It's at an investigation. All complaints are taken seriously. All reported complaints are taken seriously. And that an investigation should be initiated promptly to determine what occurred and whether the behavior constituted a policy violation. If something is seen, the intervention should be practiced and done so that the person who's doing the behavior knows that it's inappropriate and they have to stop. With that, I will leave it open to council questions. I don't believe this is going to be the only training you're going to have on this. Obviously, you have AB 1234 ethics training you have to do. You have your sexual harassment training, whether you're going to do it in person here by a trainer or you do it online by an online trainer. You're going to have that training, and we'll have more discussions if you wish about other types of training that maybe brings the community in. Civics training, basic understanding of what the council's role and responsibilities, but also the governing and policy and rulemaking function.
Okay, so at this point in time, we will take council member questions. Councilmember Bolt, please.
Thank you. I know it's not easy and kind of boring to go over, but I know it's important. So I want to be clear. Maybe everybody else understands, but for me, you said social media, you can't, so this is only for like agendized items, something that has to do with the city. But if they're doing something else, they went dirt bike riding, like that has nothing to do with the city. We can go ahead, comment on it, like it, whatever. It's just when they make a statement and or comment on something specific the city's going through that I cannot.
Yes, thanks for the clarification, Councilmember Bolt. That is correct.
Okay. You probably said it right. I just probably wasn't listening right.
I wasn't as explicit as I think I could have been, but I'll be explicit now. Yes, if it relates to city business, it's a post about city business that you like, that you comment to. The Brown Act doesn't allow that.
Next, if you had the just cause and you did it at home, they're allowed. We have to allow them to come into our home. No.
No, under AB 2449, if you invoke a just cause, you can be anywhere. And the only requirement is that you have to use audio and video, but you don't have to disclose the address of where you're participating. You could be at home because you've invoked AB 2449.
Okay. So it's only on the emergency,
On the emergency, it's the same,
same.
but for the emergency, the only difference is that it has to be your medical emergency or a family medical emergency, and the council has to approve your participation under the emergency. They don't have to approve your participation under just cause.
So when do we have to post where we're?
So if you're going to use the traditional teleconference rule, where then you would notify the city clerk in advance of where you're going to be, it's typically when you're traveling on some business or something like that, then you don't have to be on video. You can use just audio, but you do have to post your location. You don't have to ask permission of the council. And there's an unlimited number of times that currently exists for the council. There have been some agencies that have limited it, actually. Or they've also said you can't collect your pay for that meeting because you weren't there, something like that. But generally, there's no restriction on how many times you can use the traditional teleconference.
Okay, that I was confused on that. Okay, and then I had. Oh, I guess this is maybe just a personal thing for me. The AB 1234 training, I just did that like April, so I don't have to do it again, right? Or
You do not. You just have a certificate. You can provide it to or you have certificates, right? She has.
okay.
So it's every 2 years from that point.
And then there was one where you don't, the city manager doesn't want to know about all our meetings with the public. Like if I go to coffee with someone, you don't need to know that.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Councilmember Bolt. No, I do not need to be informed of your meetings with the community members. It's just your meetings and conversations with executive staff. And that's where I have provided the option for council members to reach out directly to executive staff by keeping me in the loop, but not below that level of management in the organization.
Okay, thank you. That's it for me.
Councilmember Bowen, or Vice Mayor Bowen.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you for the very thorough presentation. A quick question around a few of the things that we should or should not do. What's the process for reporting violations, whether it's Brown Act violations or workplace bullying, things that are outlined clearly that we should not do as a council member?
So as a council member, if you experience, let's start with if you experience it, then I would say you would want to report that to your city manager or myself as your city attorney. If you observe it, same. What will necessarily happen is that if you experience it and you're filing a complaint, similar to what is done for our staff and employees, is that an investigation would be prompted. Sometimes it would be a due diligence assessment, which would be done internally to determine if there is enough facts or information to warrant or prompt a more thorough investigation. Sometimes, depending on the nature of the complaint, it could jump the due diligence assessment part and go directly to a full-scale independent investigation. That is typically something that's determined by, in the staff context, the HR director, sometimes in consultation with the city manager's office. In a council context, that's a whole council role and decision that's made as it pertains to a complaint.
Got it. And so that would be something that would be discussed in closed session?
Yes, most likely, yes.
Okay.
I'm going to say 99.9% yes.
Okay, I've got a couple of questions on my side. ADA accessible location is a necessary condition for all remote participation?
Only if you're using the traditional teleconference rules. If you're using the more limited AB 2449, just cause an emergency, it does not have to be an ADA accessible location. Of course, you are limited to 7 times per year and only 2 times for just cause.
Is it fair to assume that if you're using 2449, that you would be in the proximity of a child or an adult that's receiving care, or that you would be confined because you're ill?
The law is not that prescriptive. There's a little bit of trust with with a public official where they may need to be close to a hospital, but they may not be in the hospital. They need to be close to someone who may be receiving care from them, or that they need to be close to because for whatever reason they provide, because they have to provide a reason. But it's not necessarily that they have to be in exactly close proximity or in the same house. That's not that specific a requirement. I assume if it's a child, they're taking care of a child in their house. But for an adult where they're providing care, maybe the adult's in a hospice.
Okay. For, again, sticking with this 2449, we talked about video and video being on. And I've heard the representation multiple times. There's no one in the room with me. What is the significance of there's no one in the room with me?
Thank you, Mayor. That is also, I should have mentioned that more specifically, I apologize. In AB 2449, you have to make an announcement if there is someone over the age of majority with you in the room while you're participating in the meeting under AB 2449 and their relationship to you. If then they say, there's nobody in the room with me, then that's the report.
For the person that's in the room with them, let's suppose that there is somebody in the room with them. Are there any requirements about not communicating with that person or having that person on video, or what's, I'm just trying to figure out the next steps. The answer is yes, there is somebody in the room with me. Then what?
Yes, there's someone in the room with me, and you have to disclose their relationship of that person to you.
That's it.
That's it. Now, let me leave it at that.
Okay, I just think that I have seen this multiple times now, and I'm starting just to I want to make sure that if there's something that we need to have some clarifying policy around, that we would, but I don't know that we will need to, but it would be good to explore. I'm going to come back to Councilmember Bolt.
Thank you. I didn't mean to butt in, Mayor, but if it's a public meeting, who cares? I mean, we don't know all the people in the audience. Why does someone who's at a home or taking care of someone have to disclose who they are in their relationship when nobody in the audience is disclosing their relationship to us? It's a public meeting. I understand if it was like a closed session or something like that, maybe it's not even legal to have someone in that room. But in the effects that it's a public meeting, why do we care what their relationship is or what their name is or any of that?
So let me answer that in a couple of ways. In the traditional teleconference rules, the idea is that you provide the address so that and you post the agenda so that an interested member of the public who you don't have to know can go into that room with you while you're participating in the meeting and participate in that meeting and provide public comment at the location where you are. Let's say you're in Hawaii and someone from San Leandro is there that you don't know, but they see the meeting. They are allowed to participate under the traditional rule in that meeting from your teleconference location, which is why we put the agenda there. And I agree. That AB 2449, I don't know why the legislative history says this, but I think it's because, well, no, I don't want to circumvent. It's just a requirement under AB 2449 that you have to provide that.
Hey, Councilmember Regular, please.
Thank you, Mayor Gonzalez. With regards to remote meeting, there was an instance where I had mentioned that I would be at a hotel and I would be remote, provided the address. However, during the day of the meeting, there was conversation about having to post about that meeting or post 3 days before the meeting to give notice. what is the rule behind, let's say I'm in Bangkok and I'm at a hotel. Do I have to post 3 days before to give folks ample notice?
No.
Post the sign at the meeting location to let folks know?
The 72-hour rule for remote teleconference. First of all, we're required at least 72 hours advance if you're using the traditional rule to post the address as part of the agenda, which we do, right? The question is, do you put that up 72 hours before? I believe that the answer is no, but we can confirm that for you. Just that you on the day of the meeting, you need to put it somewhere, post it on the door of the business center, for example.
And that's my understanding.
Yes.
What I was told is that I had to post it 72 hours before at that particular location.
I am not familiar with that.
I just wanted to
procedure.
clarify
Yeah,
just to make sure that we're clear that once we give notice that we're going to be remote in a foreign country, in a hotel, that folks do have access to join the business center and bring, I will have yellow cards available, which I've taken before with pens for folks to, if they do so happen to show up in Bangkok, to participate in the meeting.
Yeah.
However, I did post, but in this instance, there was conversation or going back and forth that it should have been posted 72 hours before.
I don't believe that's the case, but what I'll do is I'll commit to researching that and getting an explicit answer. And then for the next council meeting during my report, I'll just report back to the council verbally.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah.
Thank you, Rich.
We're going to go to public comment on this item at this time.
Mr. Mayor, we have no public comment in person, and we have one hand up online.
Please proceed.
Douglas Spalding, you may unmute yourself.
Thank you so much. It's the public comment guy, I guess. I want to comment on a couple parts of the presentation. First, I have to say I do appreciate the ritual of this training. It is in quite detail, and I learn something every time I hear it. So I would like to speak to the rules of decorum, and if I get a chance, to the Brown Act. I noticed on page 29 of your presentation a couple of phrases. One is that negotiations and compromise equal effective governance, and then also collectively resolve disagreements, which both things I think point up to communications. And I have a concern about this current council because from where I sit, it really looks as though there has recently been a division along factional lines that's characterized by a series of 4-3 majority votes, and not a lot of willingness to discuss things. Sometimes a refusal to discuss more controversial things, such as item 5D on the last council agenda, which I kind of took the response as quote unquote my way or the highway approach. And I really hope that the council will steer away from that. It seems to produce a lot of rancor, and I noticed anger in that meeting. To the Brown Act, I'm wondering, is there a counting about how many times someone implements just cause and or emergency circumstances? Maybe it's just my impression, but it seems like often, so at least sometimes people are using more than 2 just causes, and I'm running out of time. But I think all told, everything you said about the Brown Act really means that there should be Zoom access to all meetings, not just the council, but boards and committees. Otherwise, you are violating the Brown Act. Those are
Thank you. Your time is up. Mr. Mayor, there is no more public comment.
Just really quickly, is the Brown Act prescriptive about which meetings are afforded access by Zoom or some other remote access process?
Except for AB 2449, no.
Do we have any other comments on the training that we have received tonight? Okay, so for my notes, I have one request, and that's just a little bit of clarification on posting at a remote location in the time frame. Are there any other questions that were outstanding or that needed some further clarification? Seeing none, I'm looking at the time, and we're going to move to adjournment.